Welcome to the Therapeutic Food Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Marian Mitchell. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach, therapeutic diet expert, and founder of The Road to Living Whole. There are many different diets out there. It's hard to know which one is right for you with your chronic illness and autoimmune disease. In this podcast, I'm going to share with you the foundational pieces every single therapeutic diet out there shares, and also how to use the best one for your particular diagnosis. If you've been looking for a meal planning partner, help navigating the complicated healthcare system, and want to feel better quickly, I'm your girl. Grab your kombucha and notebook. Let's dive in. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It is National Dairy Month, and dairy has a bad rap. So today I have Amy Myrdal Miller joining me again, and we're going to dispel some myths. We're going to talk about where milk comes from, some of the farming practices that people fearmonger, and maybe there's a lot of misunderstanding around, and just the fact that dairy is actually a health food that has been misconstrued for people to think that it's not. And so I just want to demystify this and give you some real truth from an insider in the industry who is also in the health world. So it's a very unique place to be. She's not actually, she doesn't own a dairy farm or anything like that, but she is in the food industry, and she's going to educate us just like she did in our last episode to just really demystify something. So Amy, welcome back to the podcast. Can you give everybody a brief introduction about who you are, where you came to be, if they didn't listen to our last episode, and then let's just dive into the topic of the day because it's a doozy.
Yeah, no, it is, Marian, and I'm really happy you invited me back to talk about dairy foods and their role in healthful eating patterns and their role in sustainable food production. I was born on a farm in North Dakota, and my first 4 years of life, my dad did have a few dairy cows. His father, a veterinarian, had always kept dairy cows, and that was very common. That was back, in the 1920s when my dad was a little kid, through the 1950s when my dad took over his dad's farm. So by the time I was 4 years old, we were down to just a few dairy cows. My very first memory is my dad hand milking one of the last two cows in the barn and taking a teat and squeezing fresh milk onto the face of a cat nearby and watching that cat wash his whiskers with his front paw. I can see that as if it just happened 10 minutes ago in my mind's eye. So anyway, fast forward to today. I am a registered dietitian, but most of my work is with our food industry and the men and women who work tirelessly every day to bring food to the table for the rest of us, or more likely to bring food to a retail grocery store or a restaurant.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So let's just dive in. What are some of the myths that you know about with dairy farming that just maybe irk you to no end? And let's talk about them. Let's dissect them.
So I live in California, and here in California, we have very strict air quality standards. And the science shows that not only in California, but across the rest of the US, Canada, and other developed countries, the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions are things that emit carbon dioxide, not cows that belch methane. So for all of us who are still driving fossil fuel burning vehicles, for everybody who relies on air conditioning in the summer, heating in the winter, these are things that require fossil fuels to create the electricity or the power. Even if you're driving an electric vehicle or a hybrid, there are still fossil fuels used in the production and manufacturing and transport of vehicles. So when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, we all have a role to play in looking at how we are consuming and using resources. Now, let's go to the issue of methane. Why do cows burp methane? It's because cows have multi-chambered stomachs in which they have good bacteria called methanogenic bacteria, and methanogenic means these bacteria create methane when they break down feed that the cattle eat that you and I can't eat. And what are some of the examples of that? Well, I think a lot of people know that for most of their lives, cows, whether they're dairy cows or beef cattle, they spend most of their lives eating grass or hay, which is just the dried form of grass. Cattle also eat things, dairy cattle now I'm talking about, they eat things like almond hulls, orange peels. These are things that are byproducts of food processing. So dairy farms in Florida, for example, where they produce orange juice, those dairy cows may be getting the waste from those orange juice processing facilities. Here in California, there are lots of almonds grown here, and there are lots of almond hulls, which is the outer part of the almond. Then they can also grind up the almond shells. So those are just a few examples of things cattle are eating. Yeah,
I have a question. So a lot of people are going to go, oh, those aren't in the cow's natural diet. So isn't that harming them? Or isn't that maybe causing more use for antibiotics or, things like that?
Yeah, no, great question. So cattle need a lot of roughage. They need a lot more fiber than we do. And that's because of their stomachs and how they can, those good bacteria, those methanogenic bacteria can break down things that are mostly fiber and then get nutrition out of them. So cattle need that. And if they are getting it from grass and hay, that's great. But these other super fibrous materials are good for the cattle. That's what keeps them healthy. Okay, you asked about antibiotics. So, cattle that are in confined spaces may be like kids who are in daycare. If one of them gets something, they can be passed on very quickly. There are new rules, and they're actually not that new. They've been around for about 10 years now here in the US, where people who have animals that become part of our food system can't just give them antibiotics willy-nilly. Can't just put it in the feed or the water and just be like, all right, we've got this blanket insurance coverage. Nobody in my herd or flock's going to get sick. They have to be working with a veterinarian that has a reputation and a relationship with that farmer so that the veterinarian knows the herd, understands the conditions on that farm, and says, okay, we truly have one animal. Let's say it's one dairy cow that's sick. She's sick. We need to treat her. That's part of humane treatment of animals. We need to keep milking her because otherwise she's going to be very uncomfortable. And that milk will contain antibiotic residue while that cow is on the antibiotics. So that milk, it's pumping and dumping. It's like a new mom saying, I really want a beer. I've missed beer. You pump and dump, right? And then you go back to feeding your baby. But that dairy cow who's giving milk to the food supply, while she is on antibiotics, that milk cannot enter the food system. Now, what if it does? What happens? Every single truckload of milk that leaves a dairy farm is tested for the presence of antibiotic residue or anything else that is not allowed in milk. And if it is tested positive, that truck of milk is dumped. And that's a loss of $10,000 to $12,000 for the dairy farmer. So they are incentivized not to do anything that is risky to their business. And they want to take as very good care of their dairy cows as possible. There's a term in the dairy industry called cow comfort. And that relates to making sure that those dairy cows are happy and comfortable. When cows are happy and comfortable, they're less likely to be stressed, which can increase risk of illness. When they are less stressed, happy, and comfortable, they're better milk producers. So everybody that I know in the dairy industry is wildly committed to making sure that the dairy cows have the best comfort possible. But comfort is location specific.
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to bring up is there's a lot of myths out there on how cows are raised and the whole process, right? What we've talked about in the past is that the cows are usually raised on smaller farms, sold, live in a confined space to fatten up, which you've talked about in another episode, and then they're slaughtered very humanely. So a lot of people think that dairy cows are in a very stressed, very confined, away from their babies, away from their friends, and it's just a really dirty place. And that's not the case at all.
No, well, your earlier comment, just to make sure that everybody understands, cattle in the beef cattle industry move through these different transitional stages of life. So like my dad used to have a big cow-calf operation. The calves were born typically in the spring. they would spend a year or two on the farm, and then they would go to a feeder operation, meaning then they would go into a confined system. We always talked about how the cows went to Kansas City. Well, that was the next stage. They went to big feedlots there, probably were moved down to Texas where there's better weather year round. So anyway, yeah, there's a difference. Now in dairy cows, the calves are taken away from the moms very quickly. The calves are at high risk of infection. So the calves are taken away from the mom. They are given that first batch of colostrum to help boost their immune system. And then they are housed in what are called calf barns. These are individual enclosed units where the calves have access to the outside so they can get fresh air. And as they get a little bit older and their immune systems get a little bit stronger, they then get moved into pairs. And the folks who operate dairy farms, they evaluate, can these two calves get along? And then if those two can get along, then they get moved into larger and larger groups. So they get used to being part of a herd. One of the things that a lot of people are concerned about when they see, cattle in a pasture, for example, is why are they all grouped together? Don't they have enough room? They're herd animals. They like to be with their friends. Again, I'll go back to my childhood in North Dakota. My dad had many 20 to 40 acre pastures that he'd move the cattle around during the summer. So they would graze the land, then get moved to the next pasture. 400 head of cattle on 40 acres. They didn't all, take a, whatever the math is, 10th of an acre. They would tend to be all together in one spot of the pasture. Then they'd move somewhere else. If it was sunny in the afternoon, they'd find some shade trees. So anyway, that's part of the personality and characteristics of those animals. I think I've talked enough about that. I'll let you ask another question.
Yeah. Again, I kind of fell into the propaganda in my 20s. So I have a lot of that in my head that I know a lot of people are going to be struggling with. So here in Arizona, we have cattle operations. It's desert and the operations are smaller that I've seen. And yeah, there will be 6 or 8 of them together moving around the desert. We go camping a lot. So I've woken up to a herd in our campsite, and it's so interesting. It is so humane. And people they take their baby from their mom and it's just so mean, but really it's protective.
Yeah, it's protective.
And so that the calf is able to to get healthy and to live. And I think understanding cattle behavior, most people live in the city these days. They're not in the rural raising their own animals and things. So they really don't understand the process. From the outside looking in, it's really easy to judge or misunderstand things when really it's completely different than what we think.
Yeah. I also want to go back to your comment about, the myths and misperceptions and the issue of cleanliness on dairy farms. Safety and purity of milk is of utmost importance. So let's say a dairy farmer is using what's called a merry-go-round system. You're smiling because you've probably seen one, you know what I'm talking about, and it's very amazing. So dairy cows are creatures of habit. They tend to enter dairy parlors for milking in the same order, in the same way every day. And if there's a merry-go-round system being used, the cows come in order, and they are, coming from a large group, and then now it's down to one by one, and they're ready to step onto this very slow moving merry-go-round, essentially, where they step on and one of the workers cleans off all of the udders so that they are completely sanitized, and then automatic milking machines are hooked up, and these are suction cups that gently work the udder and the teats to release the milk.
Just like for moms, that pump.
Yep, and you can see it going through the tubes. And when the milking is complete, they automatically drop off. Then the teats are sanitized again, and they are sanitized with something that helps it close up so that no bacteria can make it up there and cause mastitis. And as that goes around, the cows are just standing there. They're very happy to be milked. And some of them get milked twice a day. Other operations do 3 times a day. And when it's done, they happily go back to wherever they like to spend the afternoon or the evening with their girlfriends. It's really amazing to see it because you realize the intense care, you realize the personalities, You realize the personalities of the workers, and you can tell which of the cows they may have bonded with more, the way they talk with them and interact with them. They are not pets, but they are animals that people care deeply for.
Thank you for talking about that, because I know like one of the myths was, oh, there's pus in milk and the antibiotics and all of this gross stuff, and you're just drinking it. And, again, it's fear propaganda, right? So thank you for talking about that. I have seen the merry-go-rounds. Back in my sign language interpreter days, I interpreted for 2 years for an equine science major. And in that, horses are used for cattle, and rounding them up in the desert and getting and the teachers were very passionate about it. So I got to learn a lot about it. And yeah, I know how good it feels for me when I'm full and either my baby eats or I pump, and then I'm just like, oh, and dairy cows are the same way. And I think what people don't understand is that this is what they've been doing for thousands of years, right? We domesticated them. They love us because we feed them. We love them back. And it's this very reciprocal relationship. Now that we live in cities, like, oh, I think maybe there's this move of like, we don't need it. It's inhumane, when it's really not. And we really do need the nutrients if we can tolerate milk, right? So let's move into that, because a lot of people think we don't need it, when in reality, it provides a lot of nourishment that we've been consuming for thousands and thousands of years, at least 10,000, when we started doing agriculture and all of that. So let's talk about that aspect.
Well, you're really getting my registered dietitian heart happy by getting to talk about all of the benefits of dairy products to our health and well-being. Some of the most interesting research in dairy's role in healthful eating patterns has been published over the past 5 years, showing that full-fat dairy products do not increase your risk of cardiovascular disease, may reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes. And I think for anybody, and this includes me, early on in my training as a registered dietitian, we were encouraged to get people to move from full fat milk to reduced fat milk to non-fat milk if possible. If they're going to buy yogurt, encourage them to buy non-fat yogurt. One of the early teachings was ask people to use reduced fat cheese. And I'm like, oh, hell no. Doesn't have the melty properties that people love in cheese, maybe a little less often. Well, today we're seeing that the research supports the rule for full-fat milk, full-fat yogurt, full-fat cheese. And, the recommendations here in the US are 3 servings per day. So I think about it as I love Greek yogurt for breakfast. I will always include cheese in a grilled cheese sandwich at lunch, or I'll have a feta, tomato Greek salad or something. I'll have a glass of milk in the afternoon as part of my snack. So I think about how to incorporate all the dairy, but the most powerful messaging is for those fermented dairy products. So the most powerful benefit, the yogurt and the cheese. So if you love yogurt and you love full-fat yogurt and you sometimes buy it like, maybe I shouldn't, but it almost tastes like ice cream, that's okay. Eat it and enjoy it. If you love cheese, that's great. Eat it and enjoy it. If you love milk and you like the creamy mouthfeel of whole milk, that's great. Now, if you're thinking about calories, then we have to have some slightly different conversations. And when we're talking about mouthfeel, creaminess, I just had this conversation with my sister the other night. I said, you can buy the ultra filtered milk, which has half the carbs, twice the protein, and all that extra protein makes it seem creamier. So non-fat ultra filtered milk tastes like 2%, 2% tastes like whole. Anyway, I could geek out on this a lot more, but the bottom line is fluid milk has 13 essential nutrients. Everybody is obsessed with protein right now. Guess what? A glass of milk is a great source of protein. You're getting 8 to 10 grams, depending on what state you live in. California has slightly higher standards for protein in milk than other states. If you're eating Greek yogurt, a serving of that, 15 to 20 grams of protein. If you're eating an ounce of cheese, 7 to 10 grams of protein, depending on what style you're choosing. So you're getting protein, but you're also getting potassium, which is a nutrient that almost every American does not get enough of. And what does potassium do? Lots of good things related to bone health, but also related to blood pressure control. You're also getting vitamin D if you're drinking fluid milk because it's added there. And vitamin D is challenging to get in our food system. If you're eating seafood, you're probably doing okay. If you're taking a supplement, great. So thinking about enjoyment, health and well-being, reduced risk of significant chronic diseases, making sure your nutrient needs are met, consuming more dairy is a smart choice. Now, I bet your next question is going to be, but Amy, what about people who don't tolerate lactose well? There are all the lactose-free options.
I'm one of those. I don't tolerate lactose. I actually do consume sheep and goat milk products in place of, because I know how important the nutrients are. People really do balk at full fat. What I have to say about that as a health coach is you have to get your calories from somewhere. So if you are limiting ultra processed foods and you're switching to a majority of whole foods, whether they're frozen, whether they're canned, whether they're fresh, it's when you're eating a whole food, minimally processed diet, it's actually really difficult to get the amount of calories that you need from just meat and veggies and fruit. You have to get calories from fat. And animal-based, naturally occurring fats are the healthiest that you can have. And so it's like, if you're worried about calories, well, you might as well just get the most bang for your buck, which is getting the most nutrients with those calories. So not only does whole milk taste better, it gives you those 13 essential nutrients. It helps you, helps minimize the risk of developing lifestyle-based diseases, the high blood pressure, the type 2 diabetes, all of that. And you're getting sufficient calories throughout the day. So 3 times a day, and people, I think, misunderstand what a serving size is. It's not how much you eat in one sitting. There's actually measurements. And I think that most people, like if you eat a whole block of cheese, you're like, oh, I just had 1 serving. That's not how it works, unfortunately. So, knowing what you're eating is probably the most helpful thing, because cheese is delicious and most people can eat a lot of it in one sitting. And that's where I think the concern for calories can come in, not necessarily the fact that it's whole fat, it's how much we're consuming.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few pieces of nuance that I want to share. So, as I've been sharing with friends, family, colleagues, healthcare professional audiences recently about this new research on the role of full fat dairy in healthful eating patterns, the pushback is, well, how is that possible, Amy? Well, the science shows that it doesn't increase risk of cardiovascular disease, may reduce risk of type 2 diabetes. And the nuance is, it's not that there's super magical powers in dairy. I mean, there are. The nutrient package is amazing. But when full fat dairy is taking the place of refined carbohydrates, those ultra processed carbohydrate rich foods, whether it's a sugar sweetened beverage or some super cloyingly sweet baked item or something, if those calories are being replaced by milk or cheese or yogurt that has protein and it has that saturated fat, we react different metabolically to that than we do. Most of chronic disease today is caused by inflammation. So if you're eating a lot of ultra-processed foods that have very quickly metabolized sources of carbohydrate, that causes inflammation in the body. Milk, cheese, yogurt do not cause inflammation.
Yep. And I think that that's mind-blowing for people because they think it does, and it does not. The other thing, just like a quick in there, when we have, a whole milk based product with a carbohydrate, it actually lowers that glucose spike as well.
Yeah.
So it does mitigate the effects of the highly processed food by consuming it together. Not that you want to, but I think what the science is showing is, like, if you have, even like some people react to fruit, right? If they're already like medically progressing towards type 2 diabetes, or they're already there, and then even if they switch to fruit, some fruits can still spike their blood sugar. And so we always say, like, dress up your fruit, dress up your carbs. So having a glass of whole milk with an apple or with your bowl of I mean, we have all kinds of stuff coming in season right now. In the winter, it's a lot of the tropical fruits that are super high glycemic. But if we dress them up, not only are you getting protein and healthy fats and all of those nutrients, but it also helps minimize the glucose spike post meal because of that.
Yeah, yeah, there's so much we could talk about. There's one other little point of nuance that I want to point out. When I was first telling my husband about this research, he goes, "Oh, so butter on popcorn is okay?" No, actually, when you strip out dairy fat and it's just there in the butter as the pure form of dairy fat, our bodies react very differently than if the dairy fat is in the food matrix, is within that milk, within that yogurt, within that cheese. So for the butter lovers out there, use it when you need the flavor, enjoy it, but on a daily basis, enjoy the milk, yogurt, and cheese.
So butter doesn't replace the cheese, the yogurt, the cup of milk.
It's very different metabolic. That actually is not beneficial, does not provide the protective benefits that the whole food options do.
It does taste good, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so let's see. We've talked about the farming practices and we've talked about the quality, right? There's not pus, there's not antibiotic residue, there's very high standards of quality control that are out there. We've talked about some of the health benefits. What other myths just really irk you?
Oh gosh, yes. One of the things that I hear about so often here in California is that people think that our food system is being taken over by corporations. Across the United States, and this is data based on the latest US Department of Agriculture Census of Agriculture, they do this every 5 years. The latest data shows that 98% of farms in this country are still family owned and operated.
That's amazing. That is not what you hear out there.
Now, here in California, we're the state with the lowest percentage of farmer owner operators. We're only at 90%. We have a lot of corporate owned farms in the poultry operation and in salad companies in particular, lettuce companies. But yeah, no, family farming is what it's all about. And that is particularly true in dairy farming. One of the sad things that's happened is that a lot of family dairy farms have given up their businesses. So we have fewer dairy farms today than we did 5 years ago. And why is that? Dairy farming is really hard work. Dairy cows don't take a break from needing to be milked. So dairy farming is 365 days a year. It doesn't matter whether you're dairy farming in Vermont, Arizona, California, Washington State, those dairy cows need your attention every single day of the year. If you are milking twice a day, that's a lot of work. If you're milking 3 times a day, that is intense. And the next generation of farmers isn't as willing to work as hard as their parents and grandparents did on dairy farms. So we're sadly losing the small dairy farms. That means that many dairy farms are becoming a little larger. Some neighbor decides to retire and he or she sells to the next dairy farm over. So dairy farms are getting a little larger. But, even here in California, I think the average dairy farm has something like 42 cows. They're not huge operations.
Right. But that's hours a day.
Yeah. Well, if you have a merry-go-round that can take 30 cows at a time, 42 cow operation does not have a merry-go-round. Those are for the bigger operations that need to be very efficient. But yeah, it's a big responsibility. And it's like I keep saying, it's 365 days a year. The cows don't take vacations. And
Well, I have to wonder if this generation, not necessarily, I'm sure the workload is heavy, especially when we're in the age of efficiency and, immediate satisfaction, but also the fact that it's so looked down upon by most people. Dairy is bad for you. I think that people rise to the occasion when it's looked at positively, especially this generation, right? But I think in general, we want to be proud of our job and we don't want people to be like, oh, you do that, and I'm glad that they have been researching the health benefits and dispelling the stuff that we've heard since the 70s. That's 50 years really of propaganda against the health benefits of dairy. Maybe even the 1950s, margarine started coming to the scene, all of that stuff, right? So I'm hopeful that this generation, like my kids, right, that knowing the health benefits and how good it is for you. I mean, the paleo movement, the primal movement, the keto movement, all that stuff is really, I think, pushing the research to be like, hey, this is good for you. We need to prove to people why. Right. So I'm hopeful that with the science that's coming out, that for one, we're spreading the word that it's not these butcher operations. The milk is very clean, the health benefits, all that stuff, as we're educating people. Now, hopefully the pride comes back and more people will start saying, hey, I want to take that on, even if it's just for like their family and friends, like their little circle. But if we have a bunch of little circles feeding a bunch of little circles, then, we get away from the corporate. People are so afraid of like supporting big food, right? And all of that stuff because they're so out to get us right now. I mean, there's something to be said for ultra processed food and all that, but that's supply and demand. People want it, they provide it. And I think that that's where it's just this big circle of cause and effect that is so nuanced. People live in black and white when there's a whole lot of gray.
You said something that I say every time I engage in one of these conversations. There is no black and white. There is no right or wrong. It's a matter of thousands of shades of gray, and what's the right answer? It depends. I want to go back to your comment about people in dairy having been attacked and so many things, sharing misinformation and doing shaming of what's going on farm. There are some bad actors out there. Typically, they are plants by activist groups with cameras, hidden camera exposés. That's just kind of activist BS. But one of the things that is happening on dairy farms that we do need to shed more of a light on is mental health is suffering. Once a quarter, I join a live podcast for the dairy producers of Wisconsin, in which the host and I talk about critical issues facing the industry related to health, wellness, and nutrition. And they often pair me with mental health specialists because the highest rates of suicide in agriculture today are in the dairy industry.
Yeah.
They're overwhelmed with what the rest of the world is saying about them. And this is kind of the bullying of people in our food system who shouldn't be bullied. They should be celebrated and thanked for what they do for us, what they do for their communities. Dairy farmers are some of the most philanthropic people in agriculture. Dairy farmers have been leading the way in doing fluid milk donations for food banks across the country. Why? Because it's the most requested item food banks get. So
I want to talk about the food banks because people like to donate mac and cheese. They like to donate pastaroni and stuff, but you can't have that food without dairy, and there's never enough milk. And so I did recently read something about that and how great it is. But yeah, I mean, farmers in general, the suicide rate is super high. Profit margins are razor thin. A lot of them do it because they love it. And, people think, oh, they're making $10,000 or $12,000 a month. Well, they're not seeing a lot of that. That's keeping the operation going. The demonization of real food that's happening right now and trying to force the plant-based agenda, which is just a lot of chemicals. It's highly processed. It's not as healthy as people think. And kids today, they, with TikTok and everything, there's just a whole push for views. And so people will push anything they can to get those views and to be popular. I noticed this, I have friends that are personal trainers and, they're starting to call out misinformation on moves and things, because there's just people out there who think that they know what they know and it's wrong. And there is this bullying trend with social media that you would never have in person, because if you said the stuff in person, you get punched, right? So we have these keyboard warriors, and it's already a hard life. And then to be almost hated for what you do, knowing how beautiful the process is, that's really, really difficult.
It is. Yeah. I can tell you being a registered dietitian is often difficult. We tend to get bullied by people because we're trying to be out there sharing perspectives on science that continues to evolve. Well, you guys keep changing your mind. No, the science continues to evolve. So as we learn more, we share more of the nuance. And it does at some days make me say, does what I do matter? But then I go back to my roots as a farmer's daughter, where my three brothers who farm today in North Dakota, They're not out doing public speaking. They're in their tractors right now, finishing up spring planting, starting to look at weed control, starting to think about, what's the harvest schedule going to look like? How are they going to keep their hired men active and engaged through the summer months as the crops are sitting there happily growing during those 16-hour days up on the Canadian border? And, so it's people like me and you who are sharing this information and being disseminators of what the truth is out there. I think for anyone out there listening who's like, well, I want to know what's going on, ask the people really doing the work. If you don't know a
Yeah.
farmer, take time to meet a farmer, find out why he or she is growing what they're growing, making the decisions on farm that work best for them. Just know that what one person does may not represent what everybody does. Farmers are some of the most independent people, and they don't like being told what to do. They love being given science and options and having farm advisors and people from cooperative extension say, we found that this works in your area. You may want to try it, but they don't like mandates. I know that for certain.
Yeah. And it's like, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all and have an open mind. I can tell you in my 20s, I probably would have been arguing with you this whole time, right? I went through my vegetarian and vegan stage and it was food activist, but when my health deteriorated, the paleo movement was really good for me. And just for I still eat that way. It's just best for my health. But it was the fact that the animals are so humanely raised and loved and cared for their whole life. And I was like, well, that's what I wanted the whole time. I was like, I didn't want them being abused. I didn't want dirty food, and it really did take getting educated. That equine science program was eye-opening. Hearing from the people and having an open mind, being willing to be teachable is a huge quality, I think. And I know when people are struggling with chronic illness, like my audience is, and there's just so much information coming at them all the time, it's hard to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And knowledge is power. And if you can tolerate dairy, definitely consume it. I advocate for whole food always. I have for years. It tastes better. You get satisfied on it. I actually have found when it's really creamy and full fat, it's actually really difficult to overeat
Yeah.
because it is so satisfying. I always give the example of when you go to a French restaurant because everything is full fat. There's a lot of fat in their meals and you are full for hours versus going to an Italian restaurant that's all bread and pasta and sugar, with the desserts and how you're hungry 30 minutes later when you get home.
So the research on satiety shows that there are three components that make us feel satisfied longer: protein, water, and fiber. But of these three, protein is the one that has the biggest impact. There's a saying, that we eat until we're full. It's actually, we eat until we're full of protein. So having, let's say, a cup of full-fat Greek yogurt with 20 grams of protein versus a cup of non-fat regular yogurt with maybe 7 to 8 grams of protein,
Right.
you're going to feel a lot more satisfied from that Greek yogurt, not only because of the protein, the water content, but also that fat. But then if you add in something super fiber rich like berries, man, you are going to have a winning breakfast that will keep you going all morning long so that you're not getting hangry and being a little bee to your coworkers or your family, right? I mean, all of this stuff matters. So everything that you say about whole foods, Marian, just makes my heart sing. And just helping people find that one new strategy that can help them feel better, be better. That's what this is all about, right?
Yeah.
Point about people with chronic disease and all the things that we have to think about. I say we because I've had type 1 diabetes for 45 years. The last thing I need in my life is more stress. Just managing my diabetes is way more than enough. So when something gets on my worry list that's like, I don't know, what should I do? What should I do? I immediately go to a trusted source, whether it's my physician, it's an online source that I know is credible, and I get an answer and I go, okay, now I know how to proceed. I don't let my book club ladies tell me what to do because they often are not informed. I go to people I really trust for the best science-based guidance when it comes to my health and well-being.
Yeah. And I just love your mission. And I love that you are so passionate about educating about the realities of the food industry, and really it's so empowering because again, there's this fear, big food's out to get you. And I mean, I'm sure that, obviously companies want to make money, right? But at the end of the day, if we focus on food that's close to the earth, we have an episode coming up where we talk about processed foods and what to look for and how processed fruits and veggies are transformed. And I can't wait for that episode to come out. But it's like, just people are so scared of something with a barcode, right? And they're so scared of all these things, and they don't have to be, especially when it's real food, minimally processed food. And I'm so grateful that we've connected and I mean, this is going to be our third time talking, and I know it, and I just so appreciate it because people are so scared of food. And I'm like, please don't be. It's just all about being educated, and when people can feel good buying what they like and what's available, it's transforming.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we share this mission. I love our conversation so much. You are so thoughtful in the work that you do, but I also loved hearing about you as a 20-year-old because I was that same 20-year-old. I can remember going back to the farm when I was 19 or 20 years old and telling my dad that I'd become a vegetarian. And he was like, no, we eat meat on this farm. We eat what we grow and produce. It was a very tough summer between
Yeah.
sophomore and junior year of college when I was trying to be a vegetarian in North Dakota.
Yeah, my dad, during my vegetarian days, we have family dinner every Sunday. We have for many years, and he would make a tri-tip at least once a month. And it was about 6 months. My hair was falling out. I had a gray pallor to my skin, and I finally gave in. And I cannot even believe how much I put away. And it tasted so good, and I felt so much better, and it's so funny to me that like these health foods that we've developed, over thousands and thousands and thousands, millions of years probably eating, and now all of a sudden they're demonized, right? It's almost like a diet of surplus, I guess, to like be able to say vegan or plant-based is best when the science is proving over and over and over again that minimally processed food from the earth, including animals, is truly healthy. And that's when we thrive, and what I have found is when people hear the truth and all of this, I suggest like you hear it from us, but go and research it and go to a farmer's market, meet a farmer. They would love, I promise you, they're going to love having you out and showing off their farm for you. And now you have some questions you can ask, what does your process look like for milking the cows? And what does your slaughtering process look like? And, we have all the, what questions to ask to get the answers that you're looking for. And I think doing your own research is truly powerful. Like, I mean, I trust Amy. I believe that she is being 100% authentic and truthful in what she shares. But I also encourage you to get your feet on the ground and go and meet your farmer, because it's going to be game changing.
I have a recommendation for anybody who's really curious about animal agriculture and air quality. One of my science heroes is Dr. Frank Mitlerner with the University of California at Davis. Frank is my age, but I feel like he should be 50 years older given what he's accomplished in this world. He's from Germany. He's a full professor at UC Davis right now, and he's got 2 appointments, one in animal science and one in air quality science. He is the only researcher in the world who has what's called a bovine bubble barn, where he can keep a herd of 13 cattle in the barn. They measure the air quality that goes in, they change how the cattle are fed, and they measure the air quality that goes out to see what feeding regimens have an impact on methane production, as well as measures of the health of those animals. Frank is a very hardcore scientist, but he's also a really great communicator. And he runs what's called the Clear Center at UC Davis to disseminate information on his research program, on research done by other researchers there at UC Davis. I'm a proud alumnus of that college, and I couldn't be prouder of the work that Dr. Mitlerner is doing. to share the science as it evolves.
That's fantastic. One of the, I kind of want to revisit that since that's what's really big. I follow Sustainable Dish and I followed her for years. She is very hardcore on the science as well. And I'm sure she gets a lot of that from him. She has like this infograph of like the life cycle of what cows emit and how it goes into the sky, but then how it's recycled through the soil and how it impacts our soil quality, which impacts our air quality. And really, the so-called pollution that cows emit, almost all of it is recaptured into our soil and then produces crops and puts nutrients back in. So everybody's like, oh, cows are polluting. I'm sorry, cows are part of the earth. They've been here as long as we have, and pollution's an industrial age problem. Within the last 500 years is when we've, so-called seen a huge pollution impact. And the US is actually pretty low on the pollution spectrum in general compared to other parts of the world. People are like so against cows and how they pollute, but the cows are the earth. Houses, air conditioning, all these things that we have in our city life and in our city, in our modern world, those are the things that are polluting way more than something that is the earth could ever be polluting.
Yeah, absolutely. There is so much misinformation on greenhouse gas emissions, and your point about the life cycle of methane from animals, it's very short-lived. It contributes to soil health. Cattle contribute other ways to soil health. Here in California, our state had some funding a few years ago to help those small dairy farmers move manure from their operations to local organic farms that needed that for soil enhancement and enrichment. And sometimes farmers have been wanting to do this for years, right? How do I move something from my farm that will have benefit either on my farm or another farm? Well, moving manure is not inexpensive. And is somebody going to pay for it? Depends on what the price of fertilizer is. But if you're an organic farmer, that is liquid gold, right? So getting some funds from the state to help build that infrastructure so that could happen. So yeah, there's the natural beauty of cattle, and then there's the phenomenal thoughtfulness of systems that when people in policy and people on farm and people in our legislature start working together to say, hey, how can we make all of this come together to be even more of a positive impact on animal health, human health, the financial viability of farms. Again, we've struck another chord, Marian, where I could go excited and talk for hours. But I think, you and I have both made the point that we need to reconsider the important role of animal agriculture in our integrated food system that supports our health and supports the health of the planet.
Yes, I agree. And we could just record another episode talking all about this. So if somebody wants to connect with you, you mostly work with farmers and in the food industry. How can people reach out to you?
So my company is called Farmer's Daughter Consulting. So farmer apostrophe S. I'm based in Carmichael, California. I am on social media at either Amy Myrdal Miller or Alla Heart Amy. And Alla Heart refers to my latest cookbook called Cooking Alla Heart, which is about cooking for deliciousness and cardiovascular wellness. So yeah, check out my website, farmersdaughterconsulting.com. You can reach me through my website. I love to hear what people are questioning, curious about, what you want to learn more about. And same thing on social media. Reach out if you connect with me.
Yeah, and also I'll make sure we put a link to your book in the show notes as well. Thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure we're going to talk again soon.
Love it. Thanks, Marian.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you found this episode helpful, would you do me a favor and help others find it by leaving a review, sharing a screenshot on social media, or sharing the link with a friend? By you sharing what you've learned, others are able to find this podcast and join our community. Be sure to check out my website, www.roadtolivingwhole.com, for over 160 delicious recipes, a variety of meal plans, and a blog packed full of even more healthy living tips. If you'd like to learn more about how to work with me as your coach, you can schedule a free consult through www.roadtolivingwhole.com/health-coaching/. Until next time, friend. Bye.